If God is a father, then why did my own father abandon me? These were the words that burned in Daniel's heart every single day. At only 18, he had seen more loss, hunger, and rejection than many face in a lifetime. His mother, worn out and hopeless, had almost given up on him. But what Daniel didn't know was that God was already writing a new chapter, and a man he had never met before was about to step into his story. Before we begin, I invite you to subscribe and walk with me through this emotional journey of faith, redemption, and hope. You'll see how a broken boy, who could not call God Father, discovered the truth that changed everything. The city at night felt like a mirror of Daniel's soul, dimly lit, restless, and broken in places. Neon lights flickered against rain-soaked sidewalks, casting distorted reflections that seemed to whisper his own fractured identity. Every step echoed with a silent question he could never silence. Why did my father leave me? Daniel was only 18, but his shoulders carried the heaviness of a man twice his age. He remembered the last time he saw his father's back disappearing down their apartment hallway, an image so sharp it cut through every prayer he ever tried to whisper. His mother had told him, "God is our Father now." But each time she said it, Daniel's chest tightened with resistance. If God was a father, then wasn't he just another one ready to walk away? The apartment he shared with his mother smelled of old coffee and fading hope. She worked double shifts at a laundromat, her hands raw and cracked, her eyes dim from years of holding on to promises that seemed too slow to come true. Sometimes Daniel caught her staring at him with a mixture of love and despair, as though she was pleading silently, "Don't become like him." But Daniel was already drifting. He had dropped out of school, tired of being mocked for wearing the same worn-out shoes, tired of teachers' disappointed sighs. Most nights he wandered the streets instead of staying home, searching for a place where he belonged. Yet all he found were closed doors, laughter that wasn't his, and the ache of being unseen. One evening, while leaning against the cold metal rail of a bridge, Daniel whispered into the wind, "God, if you're real, prove it. Show me you're not just another father who leaves." His voice cracked, barely audible above the roar of distant traffic. For a moment, the silence was so complete, it hurt. Then, from the corner of his eye, he noticed headlights slowing down. A car pulled to the curb, and a man in his 40s stepped out, his expression calm but intent. He wasn't dressed like someone from the streets. His coat was clean, his shoes polished, but his eyes carried a depth Daniel had never seen before. "Son," the man said gently, walking closer, "you look like you're carrying the world on your shoulders. Tell me, who told you that you had to carry it alone?" Daniel froze, his heart pounding. He had no idea who this man was, or why his words pierced so deeply, but something inside him whispered that this encounter was no accident. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, but Daniel still felt drops sliding cold down his neck. His instinct screamed at him to walk away, to retreat into the shadows where no one could reach him, but the man's eyes, steady, unflinching, strangely familiar, held him in place. "I don't know you," Daniel muttered, gripping the bridge railing as though it were an anchor. "And I don't need anyone's pity." The man smiled, not mockingly, but with the warmth of someone who had once stood in the very same storm. "Pity? No. I see something in you, son. Pain, yes, but also fire. You've been abandoned, haven't you?" The words sliced through Daniel's defenses. His throat tightened. He wanted to spit back, deny it, push the man away, but how could he? It was written all over his life. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the dripping of rainwater from the bridge rail. Finally, Daniel whispered, "He left when I was 10, walked out and never came back. So don't call me son." His voice cracked on the last word. The man stepped closer, his tone low, almost reverent. "I once believed I was nobody's son too, but God showed me something. He said, 'I will be a father to you, and you will be my son.'" His eyes glistened as he spoke, as though the verse wasn't just ink on a page, but fire carved into his soul. Daniel flinched at the mention of God. The word "father" felt like glass against his skin. He looked away, staring at the blurred city lights, his chest rising and falling like waves in a storm. "Listen," the man continued gently, "I'm not here by accident. My name is Samuel. I know what it's like to feel worthless, invisible. But I also know the moment someone chooses to believe they're seen, it changes everything." Daniel finally turned to face him. Samuel's coat was damp from the rain, his hair peppered with gray, but there was a quiet strength about him that no storm could wash away. Daniel hated how much he wanted to believe this stranger, how badly he needed those words to be true. "Why are you even talking to me?" Daniel asked, almost desperate. Samuel took a breath, his voice firm now. "Because I see the boy I used to be standing right in front of me, and I refuse to let him fall the way I once almost did." For the first time in years, Daniel's defenses trembled. He didn't know it yet, but this night was the doorway to a story far greater than the one he thought he was living. Daniel followed Samuel's gaze toward the quiet street beyond the bridge. For a long moment, he hesitated, caught between the comfort of his brokenness and the terrifying possibility of hope. He'd been disappointed too many times, by friends, by his father, even by his own prayers. But something about Samuel's presence unsettled his despair. "Come with me," Samuel said softly, motioning toward his car. "Not because you trust me yet, but because deep down, you know this isn't the life you were created for." Daniel's heart pounded. Every survival instinct screamed, "Don't go, don't believe him." But his legs betrayed his fear. Almost without realizing it, he stepped away from the railing and followed Samuel to the car. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and rain, a sharp contrast to the dampness of his hoodie. They drove in silence for several blocks, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and red through the wet windshield. Finally, Samuel spoke. "I know you don't believe God is a father. I didn't either. I grew up angry, bitter, searching for worth in all the wrong places, but then someone gave me a chance. A job, yes, but more than that, a chance to see myself the way God sees me." Daniel leaned against the window, pretending not to care. But the truth was, his chest tightened at every word. No one had ever spoken to him like this, like he wasn't broken beyond repair. The car slowed in front of a modest but well-kept building. Warm light glowed from the windows, spilling onto the wet sidewalk. Samuel turned off the engine and faced him. "This is where I work. Tomorrow morning, I want you to come back here. There's a place for you, not just a job, Daniel. A start." Daniel blinked in shock. "Why would you do that for me? You don't even know me." Samuel's voice was steady, but his eyes burned with conviction. "Because someone once did it for me, and because God never stops chasing his children, even the ones who run." Daniel's throat tightened, and he looked away quickly, ashamed of the sting in his eyes. He wanted to believe, but it was too much, too fast. All he could whisper was, "I don't know if I can." Samuel rested a hand briefly on Daniel's shoulder, his grip firm, yet gentle. "You don't have to know. Just show up. The rest will come." As Daniel stepped out of the car, the rain had finally stopped. For the first time in years, he felt a faint warmth on his face. The clouds had parted, and the stars above the city blinked like promises waiting to be kept. The next morning, Daniel stared at the cracked ceiling of his bedroom, the hum of the city already pressing against the thin apartment walls. His mother had left before dawn, her tired footsteps fading into the hallway like a rhythm he had grown numb to. On the table lay a single piece of bread, wrapped in a napkin, and a note scribbled in her hurried handwriting. "Don't give up." But Daniel felt the weight of giving up pressing down on him harder than ever. The memory of Samuel's words from the night before played on repeat. "There's a place for you, not just a job, a start." It sounded too good to be true, too dangerous to believe. Pulling on his worn-out shoes, Daniel shoved his hands into his hoodie pockets and stepped outside. The air was sharp with the smell of exhaust fumes, mixed with the faint aroma of bread from the bakery down the street. Every step toward Samuel's building felt like walking into a storm. What if Samuel changed his mind? What if this was just pity? What if Daniel failed like he always did? The voices of doubt were loud, like ghosts that had haunted him for years. "You're not good enough. You'll never make it. Everyone leaves." As he neared the building, Daniel paused on the sidewalk, staring at the glowing windows. He could hear laughter inside, the sound of people who belonged. His chest tightened. He almost turned back. Then, as if on cue, the door opened. Samuel stepped out, a clipboard in one hand, his face lighting up the moment he saw Daniel. "You came," he said simply, as though he had never doubted it. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, kicking at the cracks in the pavement. "I'm not sure I should be here," he muttered. Samuel's eyes softened. "That's exactly why you should." Something in those words, gentle yet unshakable, broke through the noise in Daniel's head. He followed Samuel inside. The building smelled of fresh coffee and wood polish, a world away from the dampness of his apartment. People moved with purpose, greeting Samuel warmly and glancing curiously at the boy by his side. "This place is more than work," Samuel said as they walked. "It's a community, and every community needs someone who once believed they didn't belong." He stopped, looking directly at Daniel. "That someone is you." Daniel swallowed hard. For the first time in years, he felt the faintest flicker of something dangerous. Hope. But deep down, another war raged. Hope was terrifying because it meant he had something to lose. The hum of machines, the smell of wood and fresh paint, the clatter of tools against metal. Samuel's workplace was alive with rhythm and purpose. For Daniel, stepping inside felt like entering another world. He had spent years drifting through streets that smelled of garbage and despair, but here everything spoke of direction. Samuel introduced him to the team. They were men and women of different ages, each busy with their tasks, but they welcomed Daniel with nods and smiles. Their eyes weren't filled with pity, but with recognition, as if they had all known brokenness too. "Here," Samuel said, handing him a pair of gloves. "You'll start simple. Work with your hands, keep your mind steady. Don't worry about failing. We've all failed our way forward." Daniel hesitated, the gloves rough in his hands. He didn't trust words like that. But when he slipped them on and began helping with small tasks, lifting, sanding, sweeping, something strange happened. The hours passed faster than he realized. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't invisible. During lunch break, Samuel sat across from him at a long wooden table. The smell of fresh bread and soup filled the room. "How do you feel?" he asked. Daniel shrugged, staring at the steam rising from his bowl. "I don't know. Different, maybe. But I don't get it. Why do you even care?" Samuel leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Because God cared for me when no one else did. I was lost, angry, abandoned, just like you. Then someone spoke truth into my life and it planted a seed. It didn't grow overnight, but it changed me forever." Daniel's jaw tightened. He wanted to believe, but the word God still stirred resentment. "Easy for you to say," he muttered. "Your dad didn't leave you." Samuel's eyes darkened with memory. "Oh, but he did. I grew up without a father's love too, and for years I refused to let God be that for me. Until one day I realized my anger was keeping me from the very thing I needed most." Daniel froze. The words sank deep, stirring emotions he had buried. He pushed his bowl away, appetite gone. "I can't just call God Father. I don't even know what that means." His voice cracked under the weight of confession. Samuel didn't rush to fill the silence. Instead, he placed a hand over his own chest and whispered, "It means you're not alone. It means the hole your earthly father left doesn't have to define you forever." Daniel's eyes burned, and he blinked hard, refusing to let tears fall. He wasn't ready to surrender, not yet. But for the first time he wondered, what if God really wasn't just another one who left? The following week, Daniel settled into a rhythm at the workshop. He wasn't perfect. He dropped tools, made mistakes, and sometimes froze when the noise and chaos around him grew too much. But Samuel never raised his voice. Instead, he corrected with patience, reminding him, failure isn't final. It's just a step. But one afternoon, the weight of the past returned like a storm. Daniel had been sanding a piece of wood when two men nearby began joking about their fathers, laughing about lessons learned, stories of discipline, memories of wisdom passed down. Their laughter rang in Daniel's ears like mockery. The sandpaper slipped from his hands, his chest tightened, and before he could stop it, anger exploded. "Stop it!" he shouted, startling everyone. The room fell silent, tools clattering to a halt. His face burned with shame as eyes turned toward him. Samuel stepped forward quickly, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. "Daniel," he said calmly, "step outside with me." They walked into the alley behind the workshop. The air was sharp with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt, the distant hum of traffic filling the silence. Daniel's fists were clenched, his breath ragged. "I hate this," he muttered, voice shaking. "I hate hearing about fathers. I hate that everyone else gets one, and I don't. And don't tell me God is a father. I can't believe that, not when he let mine walk away." The raw honesty in his words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment, Samuel said nothing. Then he nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "You're right to grieve, Daniel. What your father did was wrong. Abandonment leaves scars, but don't confuse the wounds a man gave you with the love God offers. One abandoned you. The other has never left." Daniel shook his head violently, tears finally spilling. "Then where was he all those nights I cried myself to sleep? Where was he when my mom was breaking her back just to keep food on the table? Don't tell me he was there. I didn't see him." Samuel's voice softened, but carried weight like stone. Sometimes God shows up in ways we don't recognize until later. Sometimes he shows up through people, through second chances, through nights like the one we met. Daniel's breathing slowed, his fury drained into exhaustion. He wanted to fight, but Samuel's words sank deep, stirring a battle he could no longer ignore. Could it be true? Could God have been closer than he dared believe? For the first time, Daniel whispered words he never thought he'd say aloud. "What if I don't know how to be a son?" Samuel's hand tightened on his shoulder, his voice firm with conviction. "Then you let God teach you. He is the kind of father who never walks away." Daniel stared at the ground, tears falling onto the wet pavement. His war wasn't over, but a door had been cracked open. The following days were quieter. Daniel worked with more focus, though the heaviness inside hadn't fully lifted. Every time Samuel spoke about God as Father, Daniel felt the sting of resistance. But now that resistance was softer, more like a wound being touched than a wall being built. One evening, as the workshop was closing, Daniel lingered by the door. His hoodie was damp from the drizzle outside, and he shifted nervously, avoiding Samuel's eyes. "I don't think I can come tomorrow," he muttered. Samuel looked up from his papers. "Why not?" Daniel hesitated, then sighed. "My mom, she's behind on rent again. We don't even know if we'll make it through this month. I can't just keep coming here while she's drowning." The weight of shame pressed heavy on his shoulders. He expected Samuel to frown, maybe even tell him to tough it out. Instead, Samuel closed the folder on his desk, walked over and said simply, "Come with me." They drove across the city, the streets alive with glowing signs, and the distant smell of street food carried through the rain. Finally, Samuel parked in front of a modest grocery store. "We're going shopping," he said. Daniel blinked in confusion. "Shopping? I told you we don't have—" Samuel raised a hand gently. "This isn't charity, Daniel. It's family, and family carries one another's burdens." Inside the store, Daniel walked stiffly behind Samuel as he filled a cart with essentials. Rice, beans, bread, milk. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, and Daniel's cheeks burned with embarrassment. But then he saw Samuel slip in a few extras, things Daniel liked but hadn't had in months. Chocolate cereal, a pack of sodas. It was such a small gesture, yet it hit deeper than words. Back at the apartment, Daniel's mother opened the door. Her eyes widened at the sight of Samuel, then at the bags of food. Tears spilled before she could even speak. She clutched Samuel's hands, whispering, "I was praying tonight, asking God how much longer I could keep going. And then, this." Daniel froze, the words striking him like thunder. His mother had prayed, and here Samuel stood. His heart raced, and for the first time the thought crept in, was this God answering right in front of him? As they unpacked the groceries, Samuel leaned close to Daniel and said softly, "This is who he is, a father who sees, a father who provides." Daniel's throat tightened, but he didn't argue. Instead, he found himself whispering under his breath, almost afraid of the sound of his own words. Maybe you were there after all." Sunday morning arrived grey and heavy, the kind of sky that threatened rain but held its tears. Daniel had barely slept. The images of the week replayed in his mind. Samuel's words, his mother's prayers, the bags of food sitting in their kitchen like a miracle. Something inside him was shifting, though he was afraid to name it. Samuel had invited him to church. Daniel didn't want to go. He had sworn off places like that years ago, convinced they were full of promises that never reached boys like him. But that morning, as he looked at his mother's hopeful eyes, he couldn't say no. The church wasn't grand. It was simple. Wooden pews, warm light filtering through stained glass, the faint scent of old hymnals. Daniel sat stiffly at the back, arms crossed, trying to pretend he didn't belong. But then the music began. A gentle piano, voices rising in unison, filling the space like something alive. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, but the lyrics pierced his defenses. They spoke of a father's love, a love that never abandons, a love stronger than fear. His chest tightened. Then the pastor stood and read aloud, "I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty." 2 Corinthians 6:18. The words hit Daniel like lightning. They weren't just words, they were an answer. He remembered his cry on the bridge weeks ago, "God, if you're real, prove it." And now, here it was, echoing through the sanctuary, undeniable. His eyes blurred with tears. For years, he had built walls around his heart, convinced no father could stay. But now, in the middle of that small church, he felt something breaking, a warmth flooding in, gentle yet unshakable. Samuel placed a steady hand on his back, whispering, "You don't have to run anymore. You have a father." Daniel dropped his head into his hands, tears streaming freely. For the first time in his life, he whispered words that didn't feel like lies. "Father, I need you." It wasn't the end of his struggles, but it was the beginning of something far greater. The day an abandoned boy discovered he was never truly fatherless. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel grew, not just in skill at the workshop, but in identity. He walked taller, smiled more freely, and when doubts whispered, he remembered the night Samuel stopped on the bridge. His mother, once weary with despair, now found strength in watching her son come alive. And Samuel, he continued to mentor, quietly proud, knowing that he had simply played the role of a vessel, pointing Daniel not to himself, but to the Father who never leaves. Daniel's journey was no longer defined by absence, but by presence, by a God who had answered his question in the most unexpected way, through love, provision, and a stranger who refused to pass him by. "Though my father and mother forsake me, the Lord will receive me." Psalm 27:10. Before you leave, I invite you to subscribe to this channel and share in the comments. Where are you watching from? Your story matters, because just like Daniel, you are seen, known, and never abandoned.